And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the Bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a million in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. This week, we are going to be talking about Nino Gaggi, as well as answering your questions. And right off the bat, I think there's a couple of mob news items I wanted to talk about. Probably the first one is that Joey Merlino will be sentenced on September 13th here in New York at the federal court building in Manhattan. I am not going to that. Joey's effectively looking at 2 years in prison. If we're going to try to really gauge what Judge Sullivan is likely going to do, excuse me, I think reality is he's going to get 2 years and probably a fine. Keep in mind, Joey did plead guilty to gambling, did take a $2,500 profit. How that sort of correlates into 2 years in federal prison is beyond my understanding, but it is what it is. I don't think, given the parameters, and we've talked about this before as far as how judges sort of sentence defendants. There's a point sliding scale that they go by, and you get a point for each sort of miscreant thing that you've done or been convicted of. And so they say it's a balanced system. It's bullshit. It's rigged, more or less. It's a stupid fucking gambling charge. He's probably going to get 2 years. Sliding scale-wise, the max is 2 years. Is Joey going to fall between a year and 4 months, a year and 8 months? The reality is you do 75% of your time at this point, if not higher than that. So the reality for me, I think, is Joey's going to fall somewhere between. He's going to get the 2 years, but he's going to end up serving like a year and 5, a year and 6 months after it's all said and done with. That's just the reality. I don't even understand why the points, why the judge would even waste his time sliding the scale at this point. But that's how they really determine how much time somebody's going to get. So that's going to be happening on September 13th in Manhattan. I'm sure Dave Ratweiser and George Anesthesia, that's my new name for him, Anesthesia, because he puts people to sleep. I'm sure they'll be there. At least Ratweiser will. He doesn't miss anything. Okay. In other news, in Providence, Bobby DeLuca was sentenced to 5.5 years for obstruction of justice and 2 counts of providing a false statement for misleading investigators. If you're not caught up to date on what this is all, first of all, Bobby DeLuca is a fucking rat. Frank Cadillac Salemi's a fucking rat. So this is essentially one fucking rat telling on another fucking rat. It's so fucking ridiculous, this whole thing, but it goes back to Bobby DeLuca, who's 75 years old, by the way. It's about a 1993 mob hit on Steven DeSaro, who at the time was a Boston club owner, and then in 1992 there was a hit on someone named Kevin Hanrahan. And basically when Bobby DeLuca turned an informant, they're supposed to tell the feds everything they do, but once again we're seeing that these guys just sort of give up whatever the fuck they want. And Bobby DeLuca doesn't bother mentioning the 2 fucking hits. Why he doesn't? Maybe he felt like he'd get more time. Maybe he felt like his deal wouldn't have been as good. Anyway, for some fucking reason, I don't understand how this happened. But anyway, in 2011, DeLuca testified against basically the whole entire Patriarcha crime family, which decimated them. They've had problems since the 60s, well, since Ray Patriarcha died in the 80s, so this is nothing new. But like I said, while DeLuca was cooperating, he didn't inform the FBI about these two other little murders that he just suddenly forgot about. Maybe he had Alzheimer's. But in any event, Frank Salemi ends up going back to the FBI. He's another fucking rat. And basically tells on DeLuca. What I don't understand is, what does either one of these pricks have to gain? Especially Frank Salemi. He's the biggest fucking rat next to some other guys. But he essentially, years after this is over and done with, runs to the FBI and tells them even more. He's a scumbag. He's a fucking jerk-off and a dog and a coward. So is Bobby DeLuca. I don't feel any any fucking sort of respect for that guy because he's a rat too. But it's like, this is the epitome of like fucking vile. You've got one rat, you got another rat, the other rat runs and tells the FBI on two murders that the other rat didn't talk about. It's like, this Queen of the Day shit must be really popular and fun to do because these guys just keep fucking doing it. So Bobby DeLuca gets an additional 5.5 years for whacking two people, which sort of brings me to another fucking point. It was reported in Gangland News, Jerry Capisci's site. I don't read his shit. Somebody else told me that Sammy the Bull Gravano has essentially written a letter to a judge claiming that Frank Locascio didn't have anything to do with the De Bono hit. And I sort of question his motivation now. His excuse was that, well, nobody fucking asked me back then if he had anything to do with it, so I wasn't going to say nothing. Well, why? If you know a fucking guy is innocent and didn't kill nobody and he's taken a murder charge, you should at least, even if you're going to be a fucking rat, you should at least have the compunction to say, guys, you're putting a murder on this guy. He really didn't have nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, Frankie Locke is fucking 85 years old, been sitting in prison since fucking the 80s, doesn't probably have a whole lot of time left to his life, and now Gravano wants to do this, and his excuse is that, well, nobody asked me? Like, you can't make this shit up. And the pure reason why the real reason why Sammy Gravano didn't say anything is because he's a fucking piece of shit. He's a gutless fucking rat, coward fuck. That's the reality of it. That is the reality of it. Because there's no other reason why he didn't tell him back then. He wanted to get his deal. He got his deal. Then he becomes a fucking Aryan Nazi fucking drug dealer. Brings his daughter into it, his son, his wife. They all sell drugs together. It just amazes me that Sammy Gravano now wants to, like, tell the truth. The guy's never told the fucking truth. Ask Gaspipe Casso about that, who had his fucking deal ripped up because he started telling the truth about who Gravano really was. Which brings me to another point with Gravano, because I'm sick of seeing this. People, for some reason, and there's a question in the Q&A I got, and I'll go into it more, but, you know, Gravano gets 19 murders, does 5.5 years, gets to join WITSEC, goes into WITSEC, starts selling drugs, ripping off everybody, ends up doing another 15 to 20 for drug dealing in Arizona. But yet, the one thing that nobody mentions is Alan Kaiser and what he did when he killed that 17-year-old boy. Just based on that merit. I had this conversation with my attorney in a car last night on the way back from Philly. How do you kill a 17-year-old kid and the mob doesn't kill you for that? And then second of all, how do you, like, get a deal after killing a 17-year-old kid? That deal should have been taken off the table immediately. You know what? No, you killed a 17-year-old kid, therefore you ain't getting no fucking deal. But it just goes to show that the government is willing to fucking have a half-assed morality when it comes to this shit. If the fish is big enough, I'll use Joey Merlino as a reference with J.R. Rubio. If Joey Merlino is the big enough target, the government's willing to sleep and fuck anybody as long as they get the fucking end of the story right. They did it with Kreisberg. They did it with Rubio. Pete Lavaglio, who we're going to talk about in a second, who's a disgusting piece of shit. How the fuck he went from the Merlino trial into this fucking Lucchese shit that's going on is beyond. Man, he's a fucking traveler. He's a traveling rat. They ought to get a whole circus of these fucks together. But the point I'm trying to hit home is that I will never fucking understand, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I will never understand how somebody can kill a 17-year-old kid and then get a deal. As long as the fish is big enough. In the case of John Gotti, hello, the government wanted Gotti so fucking bad they were willing to accept, really, a guy who killed a 17-year-old kid and 19 other fucking people for his own monetary gain and greed. Willing to let that go, forgive him of that, as long as John Gotti goes to prison. When John Gotti Jr. went to trial, it was the same sort of shit. They find every piece of fucking half-assed, wannabe, never was gonna be, never anything, to make up fucking egregious lies to try to pin a fucking death penalty charge on somebody. This is the way the government has worked. I'm not saying it's like this in all cases, but it's awful convenient. When they really want to go after somebody, the depths and the morality that these fucking subhuman turds have. And I think that when you let somebody like Sammy Gravano, your Peter Lavaglio, your fucking Anthony Pergianos, your fucking Kevin Weeks, all of the rats, take them all together. I think they should all have to live together with FBI agents on an island and let them all fuck each other silly till they die of like some sort of fucking evil ocean STD or some shit. That's how much I fucking hate this situation. You should never be fucking rewarded in your life for anything when you tell on somebody. I've said this before, and I'll say it one last time before I move on to the Lucchese thing, is that if I get into a car full well knowing that Vinny, Joey, and Tommy are going to rob a fucking bank, and I put a ski mask on my fucking head, and I sit outside, I don't go in, I don't point the gun, but I'm going to get a nice kickback, right? And then everybody gets arrested because we get caught, and I run and tell. Why? I knew I was getting in the car. I knew what they were fucking doing. I was going to get a kickback from it, but because I don't want to go to jail, I'm going to point the finger at everybody else. That is some like elementary school shit. Who farted? Everybody points at fucking Tommy in the corner who nobody fucking likes because he eats his boogers or whatever the fuck. You know? Or because his clothes are dirty. Whatever kids do, because kids are brutal. But it's the same theory. They all gang up on somebody else. And you know they ain't telling the fucking truth. You know? So, anyway, as far as that goes, I'll address that sort of a bit later. Anyway, the Lucchese thing. If you haven't been following this case, and there's a reason why I haven't been covering it, I just, I was caught up in the Merlino stuff, and I want to be very, very clear about this. I'm very careful about what I do say. What I'm about to say now has already been published and publicized as allegations, so I'll go with it there. But I'm never one to like just point a finger at somebody without there being. I let the FBI make those stupid allegations first, and then your Jerry Capicis and your George Anastasias. I let them make those allegations before I say shit. But anyway, according to Pacer, there's a multitude of rats in this Lucchese deal. The massive Lucchese trial, which really revolves around a 17-year racketeering enterprise, which includes alleged mobsters Joe Ditello, John Castellucci, associate Vic Bruno, and Carmine Garcia. Also in this indictment and allegations are allegedly street boss Matthew Madonna, Stephen Crea Sr., Stephen Crea Jr., Matthew Madonna, and Stephen Crea Sr. don't go on trial till next year. But a whole bunch of them were indicted on this racketeering sweep. And the government, you're going to love this, the government plans to use Peter Lavaglio, which I don't know how he goes from the Joey Merlino trial with J.R. Rubio to the fucking Lucchese thing. It's like they're parading rats. They're parading rats. But apparently Peter Lavaglio is going to testify. Anthony's, Joe Foray, Bobby Spinelli, and Anthony Zaccolillo is going to testify. So they've got all these fucking rats lining up, ready to tell it. But Peter Lavaglio, how the fuck does he get into this? This guy's like the fucking capo di tutti ratty. It's just unreal to me that this guy's like in 2 fucking major mob trials as a fucking rat. So either the people surrounding him are completely the dumbest fucking people to ever walk this planet, or this motherfucker, like I just said, is the capo di tutti ratty, because that's what it is. That's pretty much it for the news. There is some other stuff going on, but I didn't want to get totally absorbed and go on for 40 minutes with the news. Okay, as far as the website goes, in October we're going to launch a brand new website, all-inclusive, password protected. All the radio shows will debut there. All the articles will be there. And so what's the multi-million-dollar question here? Because a lot of people sort of know. I sort of announced it, and I took it off of Facebook, and the only reason why I did was because I felt like maybe I should approach it this way instead. I am moving to a pay site. There's going to be no fucking way around it. People are going to be upset that I'm going to charge. I don't care. While I hope that many of you do subscribe, I know that many of you won't, because I know a lot of people want shit for free, and I get it. Who doesn't want shit for free? However, what you need to understand is Jerry Capisci charges $5 for 5 paragraphs. People, and 25,000 people a month are paying for that. All right, this isn't a marketing scheme to in any way get rich. It is to basically allow me to keep doing stuff like giveaways. It allows me to travel and go interview some really cool people. It allows me to bring more people on and do live events at special places, which is being planned as we speak. Also, it costs money to run a fucking website. So, how much is it, and what are the parameters? Here's the deal. It's going to be $4 a month, all right? For $4 a month, if you pay for a full year, which is really inexpensive. It's like $1 a week. You're going to get all the radio shows, all the live events, giveaways, all the articles, some cool Mob Talk Radio swag. So there's a lot you're going to get for it. If you don't want to pay for a year, totally get it. Then it's going to be $4.50 a month. It's a little more expensive to do it that way. And so a lot of people are going to be upset that I'm going to charge. But the reality is that, you know, covering trials costs money. Going to Pacer costs 50 cents a fucking goddamn page to look at. That's expensive, right? A website's going to cost me some money. So it winds up being $1 a month. I believe that what I do is comparable to what Jerry Capisci does. You're getting my radio show. You're going to get Scott Williams Collier's radio show. So if you like serial killers, motorcycle gangs, all that kind of good shit, you're going to get that there. In-depth articles, special guest stuff. We're going to do some live events, some meet and greets. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to be doing. But as we move forward, so don't hold me to the price. The price is not going to go up. If I say $4 to $4.50 a month, it's not going to go above that. It's going to stay right there at that. If anything, it may get lowered, but probably not. It's going to stay right around $4, $4.50 a month. I've got to do it. I've got to be able to survive and get some money out of this, because a lot of people have speculated on making money. Now, I don't understand where that sort of comes from. I don't owe anybody an explanation on that. Am I getting a kickback from some advertisements? Absolutely. But am I getting rich? By no means. Am I paying bills? Just barely. So the reality is that I could have done advertisements, but the problem is with what I do specifically, a lot of advertisers shy away from it. They're not comfortable with the subject material. Totally get it. The other thing I don't do is I don't buy subscribers. I don't buy views. I don't buy algorithms. A lot of people that are on YouTube buy subscribers, buy views, buy sponsorships. I don't do that. And the reason why I don't is because I wanted to earn it. Sure. Does it look great if I have 100,000 subscribers? Yeah, sure. Great. And is that more revenue? Sure it is. But I want to earn it. I don't want there to be some like sort of false narrative that I paid for this or that or the third. So everything I got, I've earned. And at this point, with what we're setting out to do, just with the live events in general, special events, the giveaways, the articles, the radio show, in addition to my radio show, you're going to get part of Scott's radio show, and you're going to get a third radio show, which I'm not ready to talk about now. Mob Talk will always be Mob Talk. We'll talk about the mafia. We're going to move into biker gangs and some other facets of crime. And we have a whole bunch of guests sort of semi-lined up. And when I say sort of semi-lined up, means basically that it's sort of it's a yes, but it's not like written in concrete. There's a lot of things that have to happen first, and I can't do that on the platform I'm on now. I just can't. It needs to be a little more professional, and I need to have a site that's password protected so that we can weed out some of the people that just like to come on and start a bunch of shit. So if you want to join the site, fantastic. If you want to revolt and get angry and smash my inbox with threats and you're stupid and I wouldn't pay for this shit, go right ahead. I've already gotten those anyway. I've done this sort of thing before. I did it with hockey. I was very successful with it there. It's very inexpensive, and all it simply does is allows me to take whatever financial crap that comes from it and roll it back into the show, making it better. Nobody's going to get rich off $4 a month, folks. Seriously. So I just would rather be upfront and tell everybody what's going on with that now than to wait October and everybody go, what the fuck? There will be some facets to the website which will be free, but not a lot of it. The radio shows will not be. Now, the next question I'm going to get is, are you still going to put stuff on YouTube? The stuff that is on YouTube now will always be there. However, I'm going to take all those shows, dump them onto the new site. There will be a widget where you can click the button and hit play and listen to whatever show you want. I am not going to do iTunes, and I am not going to do any of the applications that allow you to download. There's a reason why. One, I want to own my material, and I think that if I'm going to go to iTunes, they're going to get a kickback off what I do, and that's not cool. Their platform is huge, but there's also a dispute between me and another company who took my shows and put them online, and I own the rights to that. So that's a whole long end problem. But as far as being able to go to the website, you will be able to go on your phone and click the button and listen. But as far as downloading, I'm going to try to find a way to make that possible. But what I don't want is the inevitability of somebody paying the money, downloading it, and then putting the show out for free. I just can't do that at this point, and that's just sort of where we stand. Now, things could definitely change. I may change some of the things I may think about doing or not doing come October, but that's pretty much where we're going to be at. Like I said, I personally don't think that it's ridiculous expensive. It turns out to be $48 a month. It'll have rollover subscription, cancel at any time kind of stuff. But I just think, as far as the giveaways that we're planning, I've talked a little bit with some people about some really special cool shit we want to do. And I think that, let's just do the math for a second, okay? The Omerta shirts that we're going to give away, those run from anywhere from $25 to $30 a shirt on the website, on their website, on the Omerta site. We're giving them away for free. We're paying shipping and handling. We're taking a loss. But Omerta was nice enough to give me a ton of stuff to give away because they believe in what I'm doing and I believe in their clothing line. As the same, the American Gangsters Company is sort of doing the same thing with us. They sent me a bunch of Gotti t-shirts and stuff today. So it's all about, me being able to roll over and afford to do cooler shit. Also, I meant to say this on the new webpage. There is going to be some documentary type of stuff. I'm going to talk with a couple of people that I know. I've sort of loosely talked to them already about this. But one of the things that I've always said was that I want the mob documentaries are good, but they're not really shown in the right way. They're not really talked about in the right kind of way. So we're putting together some different ideas of stuff we want to do. So it's going to be a fully multimedia type of website. That's the goal. I would not, under any circumstances, tell you I was going to do that if that wasn't going to be the case. So as we move further along, it's looking more and more like it's going to be the middle of October, not the beginning. But any concerns you have, email me. Any ideas you have, email me. I'm open to suggestions. I pursued every avenue that was physically possible without having to charge, but that's going to be the reality of it. I know I'm probably going to lose a lot of you, and while I certainly understand that, I hope you can understand my situation, that I've been doing this for almost 3 years now for free. And I think it's time that, there's some fruits of my labor. And more importantly, I just want to be able to dump it back into the show, making it better and better and better. One of the things I want to do is go to Chicago, see my boy Joey Lombardo, do a show live from Chicago, go out to Vegas, do some stuff in Vegas, interview some people that I know down south that know some serious stuff. So there's a lot of things down to Florida. There's a lot of stuff I want to do, and I can't physically do that while being in New York and running a hockey page on top of a mob page and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm being pulled in 90 different directions, from music artists to film producers to documentary makers. So, a lot of people are tugging at me and want me to do stuff, but most importantly, I want to put my show first, and that's what I'm attempting to do. So, all that being said, that's where we're at. Send your threats, your complaints. You can follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. You can message me directly on Facebook. Type in Mob Talk Radio. Go ahead, give us a like, give us a subscribe. The only thing I ever ask is that you just share our stuff. That's it. You don't have to like it. You can tell me you hate it, but just share it. At least share it. Even if you fucking hate it, just share it and say, oh, I fucking hate this shit. So that's where we're at. So if you have any comments, questions, concerns, complaints, or ideas, let us know. Now, one of the other things somebody had said was, why don't you take donations? There's two reasons why I won't do that. The first thing is, I don't want your money, per se. I think that when people give you donations, I think there becomes a line that gets very skewed on where the money goes, and I'm an honest guy. And that's why if I'm charging for content, I know you're getting the content, and the money is going right back into the show. Whereas if I accepted donations like a lot of other pages do, there's really no proof of where that money's going. I mean, it could go to a crack habit. You know what I mean? So I always just try to be very honest about what's going on, and everything I do is going to go right back into the radio show itself. So all that being said, that's pretty much where we're at with that. Like I said, reach out if you've got an issue with it. And once again, for those that are just going to run away and scream foul and don't want to pay anything, I appreciate everything you've done for me thus far. But also, you have to understand that this is a business, and you got to make money in business. And I hate to lose you, but I know that I have a base large enough that I can sustain, pretty much whoever leaves. So all that being said, let's get to some questions and answers. Now, the first thing I want to say is this. There were a couple of questions that I got that are seriously, would take me a whole entire show to do, like the whole entire mob history on Omaha, Nebraska, or the whole entire mob history of Milwaukee from 1920 to 1950. I can't get into that because that's a whole entire show in and of itself. So the one thing that I want to do, especially considering that I've got fucking 5 pages of questions here, is I want to get through the questions that I have. So if you did submit one and I don't get to it, it's just because the amount of time that it would take to answer that just supersedes the show I'm trying to do, because after the questions I got Nino Gaggi. So with all that, let's begin. All right, just read the Sinatra Club. How true is it? To be honest with you, I've never read it, and I won't read it. Sal Polisi wrote it. I don't like the guy. He's a fucking rat. I have a tendency of not really agreeing with what rats write. I think that the guy's, a big mouth. I think he's made up a lot of shit. Therefore, it's up to you. Listen, if you read a book and you like the book, what the fuck do you care what I think? A book is a book. Sometimes you can take a book and it's written by somebody that's probably not being honest, but you can just still enjoy the book for its entertainment value. So I don't want to kick the book based on my issue with informants. So if you got something out of it, that's great. But me personally, I wouldn't put any stock in anything Sal Polisi writes. I wouldn't. The guy's a rat. I just think he's full of shit. But you never know. You might read the book and like it, so that's all that really matters. All right, as portrayed in Bugsy, did Benny Siegel make Jack Dragna crawl on all fours and bark like a dog after he found out he'd been stealing? Was it Dragna himself or his associates who killed Siegel after being given the okay by New York? No, that's I don't. This is once again Hollywood making up shit, taking an idea or a story and sort of making it tougher. First of all, Benny Siegel was a tough guy, okay. But the problem, the problem with the question is, Benny Siegel did not run Los Angeles. Mickey Cohen did. No matter what anybody says, people will say, "Oh, well, Jack Dragna was scared shitless of Mickey Cohen." Mickey Cohen was really the guy in Los Angeles. He controlled all the fucking unions, all the film stuff. Mickey Cohen was the guy that scared everybody. As far as Benny Siegel stealing, that's obviously what he was doing, but the murder order came from Meyer Lansky, not from anybody else. Meyer Lansky wanted Benjamin Bugsy Siegel killed. At the Havana conference, they even discussed it, and pretty much Meyer Lansky brought it up, and Luciano said, go ahead and kill him, and that was pretty much it. But it was not Dragna and his associates that had that done. This was done by Jewish gangsters, and it was done by multiple people at the behest of Meyer Lansky. So absolutely not. Benny Siegel had power, but not like that. Trust me, Mickey Cohen never would have tolerated that for an instant. Okay. When it comes to the mob, we can all agree that a lot of mobsters were extremely intelligent. Then there were some that were not so intelligent. Who are the three stooges of the entire history of the American mob? Well, here's the thing. I posed this question to my friend and attorney Elio Forcina. We talked about this. First of all, to be in the mob, you got to be kind of crafty. You got to be smart to begin with. They don't allow dummies to come around. But I agree with him, and we talked at length about this. I think the dumbest, the most unintelligent guy ever to be in the American Mafia is Nicky Scarfo. What he did to Cosa Nostra in Philadelphia completely changed the landscape, fucked it all up. The guy's a psychopath. He just wasn't very bright, and I'll just leave it at that. All right. Do you think Vito Genovese was behind the failed hit on Luciano in Cuba? To my knowledge, there was never a hit on Luciano in Cuba. I don't know where that information really came from, but to my knowledge, that never happened. Genovese had a lot of balls, but Genovese didn't have those kind of balls. I think Genovese at the time knew that he definitely was going to take over the Lucianos. It was a matter of time. But believe me, I think he was smart enough to know that if he attempted anything like that in Cuba, all hell would have broken loose. And I don't think he was willing to push that button. This question, and I'm not knocking who asked it, but to me this sounds like you watched The Godfather a bit too many times. The reality is nobody tried to kill Luciano in Cuba. I don't know where that sort of came from, but to my knowledge, nothing like that ever happened. All right, so here comes the question. Do you know the mob history in Omaha, Nebraska? I'm not going to answer this in full because it just would take too long, but how about we do this? Really, this is how the mob got started. It begins in 1891 with a guy named Tom Dennison. If you want, look up Tom Dennison. You can read all about him. He was a very big guy. Dennison was an old frontier gambler who typically ran dance halls in Colorado before arriving in Omaha, and he basically set up the first policy game that was in Nebraska, and he would pretty much own Omaha criminally. He even entered sort of into politics, sort of kind of semi-held public office, but really the main gist of it was that he could control politics. He knew he could keep his racket safe. He arrived in Omaha with $75,000 and realized that the town was effectively wide open. He could do whatever he wanted. He also realized that controlling the politics would protect his rackets for a long time. He controlled gambling, prostitution, and bootlegging. For 25 years, there was no crime that was committed in Omaha without his direct approval. So if anybody wanted to do anything illegal, they had to go to fucking Tom Dennison first and get it cleared. When Prohibition begins, Dennison forges an alliance with Al Capone and Tommy Pendergast in Kansas City. When Harry Lapidus ends up speaking out against Dennison's growing power in Omaha, Dennison doesn't waste any time and has him killed. Dennison was also responsible for the OLS, which was the Omaha Liquor Syndicate, which controlled a lot of liquor shipments, especially in Omaha and into the Midwest. And through Dennison, Frank Calamia ended up taking over the Omaha Liquor Syndicate, and then it just kind of from down there sort of begins a spiral of the Italian influx into Omaha via Iowa. Louis Fratto was in Iowa, and Louis Fratto was also in Nebraska a lot. So there's a lot of different things there, but like I said, to go through the whole entire history of Omaha would just take incredibly too long. Here's another one. Did the Mafia kill Salvatore Giuliano? It's another question that I could sit here and do a 2.5 hour show on Sal Giuliano. If you're looking for sort of a quick comparison, he was the Che Guevara of Sicily. He lived from 1922 to 1950. He was a Sicilian bandit. He rose to power right about after the time the Allied invasion of Sicily happened in 1943. He ended up killing a cop that tried to arrest him for black market food smuggling, which at the time 70% of Sicily's food was pretty much black market food. From in 1945 to 1948, he was essentially a power broker in Sicilian politics. Was a colonel for the movement in the independence of Sicily. His power pretty much infuriated the Italian government, and they ended up sending 2,000 police officers combined with soldiers to kill him. They wanted him off. He was creating problems. He was really the first guy in Sicily that just killed rats and enemies without second thought. If you informed on him, he'd kill you and your family. If he thought you were going to tell on him, he'd kill you. If you were his enemy, he would kill you. And he's been called the Robin Hood of Sicily. So I do think that the mafia is responsible for his demise, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But like I said, I can't get into like a 15-minute dissertation on Sal Giuliano. So look up Sal Giuliano, and you can read all about him. Maybe we'll do a show on him at some point, because I think that there would be a valid reason to definitely do that. But as far as that goes, that's Sal Giuliano, and you can look it up for yourself. Sorry, I was getting a tweet. I should turn it off my phone. All right, which boss had the least amount of balls? Joe Profaci, Paul Castellano, or Frank Costello? All right, so the least amount of balls. Each one of them individually could be a button pusher. You kind of got to take Costello out of that because Costello wasn't necessarily a button pusher. He would use it if he had to, but Costello was a dignitary. Costello was the guy that could get shit done politically. He was a great guy to sit down and handle disputes between people. So he wasn't of the same makeup. Castellano, absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, didn't have a violent bone in his body, was more of a figurehead than he really was anything. But the least amount of balls of the three of them, probably Castellano, I think. Profaci would push buttons back in those days. He would not hesitate. Costello really wasn't in the position to do that. Castellano, I'm just not even going to go there. But for the sake of this question, I think probably the least amount is probably Castellano. All right. Most interesting mafioso not living that nobody has probably ever heard of. Joe Badway. Look him up. You're probably not going to find a lot about him. I will say for the record, he is my second cousin. I'm not going to get into like what he did and all of that stuff. You can look it up for yourself. But there's a lot that hasn't been really publicly said about him. There has been a lot, but a lot of it's misconstrued and not true. And I could go a little deeper than that and talk about other relations, but that's as far as I'm going to go with that. Let me just say it this way. And this asshole Joe Manini, Joe Manny, whoever the fuck he thinks he is, constantly keeps telling me that J.R. Russo was responsible for the Barboza hit. I've said it before. He wasn't. I know who was, and I'm just going to leave it at that. All right. Do you think John Gotti actually told Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti that he got the commission's approval to clip Paul? Of course I don't fucking believe any of that. I think Philip Leonetti is lying. Obviously, they didn't ask Nicky Scarfo that, so you're going to take the word of Philip Leonetti, who's full of shit, been full of shit his whole life. Why would John? And here's the way I want to answer this. In the grand scheme of things, at that time period, right then, that day when this allegedly happened, John Gotti is the boss of the Gambino crime family. Who the fuck is Nicky Scarfo in comparison to John Gotti at that time? Do you think Nicky Scarfo is going to clip John Gotti and say anything twisted to John Gotti? I don't think so. That just wasn't going to happen. So why does John Gotti have to explain a fucking thing to Nicky Scarfo? He doesn't. And I don't think he would. Now, if you wanted to argue that John Gotti capitulated and basically just eased it by saying, I got the commission's approval, don't worry about it, I could understand where people might believe that, but I don't think there would have been a single fucking conversation between John Gotti, Nicky Scarfo, or Philip Leonetti about Big Paul Castellano getting killed. First of all, Gotti didn't even mention Castellano's fucking name. You don't find a single fucking wiretap where Gotti admits to doing that. You don't find a single fucking wiretap where Gotti badmouths him repeatedly. So what the fuck makes you think he's gonna sit down and say that to a Philadelphia boss? It's just not gonna happen. All right, do you think Michael Corleone secretly hated Tom Hagen and always blamed him thereafter for Sonny's death? I don't think so. Granted, we're diving into sort of the characters of The Godfather. You know what? Michael was thrust into that position. He didn't really have a choice. His father was shot. His brother Sonny was killed. And he just sort of had to get involved. I've heard Dominic Montiglio, who we're going to talk about a little bit today, say that he felt like Michael Corleone when he saw the film. Get the fuck out of here. You had nothing in common with that. These guys, they all fucking honed to The Godfather like that's reality. It's bullshit. It's pageantry. The mafia is blood, guts, and greed. That's it. This idea of the shit that you see in these films, like, it's fantasy. It's fantasy. Stop believing that it's real. But I don't think Michael secretly hated Tom. I think that when it came time to get down to business, I think Michael was a very blood-oriented type of guy. Family was family. Tom Hagen was an outsider. He wasn't an outsider in terms, I mean, they were raised together. His father took him in. But Michael, he took the mafia shit, blood in, blood out, so to speak. You're my blood. And I think that's what it was. I don't think he hated Tom Hagen. Because, first of all, nobody could control Sonny. Sonny just did whatever the fuck he wanted. If you go along with Tatalia and everything that happened there and the drugs and how Sonny wanted to get into the drug business and all of this and that and the third, you also got to look at when Sonny started to direct orders and went over Tom's head. Tom was giving him solid advice. Don't do this shit. It's going to create a war. And Sonny doesn't want to listen. And so ultimately Sonny pays with his life because of it. So I don't think Michael really ever secretly blamed Tom Hagen. I think that Michael just realized that Tom Hagen was not cut out to be a gangster, that he respected Tom Hagen enough not to put him involved with that shit. And I think that that's the reality of it more than anything. So, I mean, it's fun to kind of poke holes at it and kind of look at it from an esoteric kind of fucking way. But I don't think Michael secretly hated him. I think Michael had a lot of secret hatreds, but I don't think Tom Hagen was one of them. But that's just my opinion. What's your opinion? Let me know. All right. Who handled Las Vegas the best or the worst? Marshall Caffiano, Johnny Roselli, or Tony Spilotro was a fucking joke in every sense of the imagination. He fucked up Vegas for a lot of people. So he's probably the worst. Johnny Roselli probably ran it the best. Ultimately, Johnny Roselli, in the end, ends up in a fucking drum in Biscayne Bay, but that goes back to some other shit. And Marshall Caffiano was absolutely fucking brilliant. But I think the best was Johnny Roselli, the worst was Tony Spilotro, and Marshall Caffiano is sort of somewhere in the middle. Johnny Roselli was a guy of a lot of different things, especially with Vegas. He was the Kennedy guy. He was the CIA guy. So Johnny Roselli knew a lot of things. All right. Is there still a connection between the Lucchese crime family and the 9 Trey gangsters in New Jersey? I also heard a connection between Joey Merlino and black gangsters. All right. Here's the thing. I don't know what fucking, and this isn't to the person who asked the question because I get this question a lot from a lot of different people. Stop watching The Sopranos. Stop believing that Tony Soprano's a real fucking person. Stop believing The Sopranos. I'm going to keep saying it. Stop believing the fucking Sopranos. It's a fucking TV show. I say that because, not because of the person who asked this question. It's a legitimate question, I think. But I think that there's this sort of assertion that the mafia goes hand in hand with black gangbangers. Not true. I could really probably start some shit by saying some things about that, but I don't want to. But I think that when you say a connection to somebody knows somebody, yeah, absolutely. Everybody knows everybody in the streets. Are they working together like the Bloods, the Crips, and the fucking Aryan Nation? No, absolutely not. Listen, I don't personally know what affiliations Joey Merlino has, other than his friends, right? I know that a lot of organized crime groups are friends with motorcycle gangs, like the Pagans, the Hells Angels, and etc. But as far as like Joey Merlino getting in a car and going and hanging out with a bunch of fucking gangbangers on the corners, it's not going to happen. It's not reality. I think there's probably at some point an ebb and flow where the mob really had to come to terms with, do we want to let outsiders get involved in hits? And on one hand, it makes a little bit of sense. I mean, you bring in somebody off the streets, let them do a hit for you. Fuck them, they get caught, it's their problem. The problem with that is I just don't see that being feasible. I don't see that as being reality. The mob handles business themselves. Often when the mob goes outside the family to contract something, what happens? They all get caught. And I'm not trying to make this a race issue because there's not a racist bone in my body, but I just don't. First of all, the mob's got enough heat on them to begin with. They're not going to hire a street corner jerk-off who can't even shoot a fucking pistol right to do a hit for them or to sell drugs for them. I just now, as far as Joey Gallo goes, Joey Gallo was really in big with the urban community. Nicky Barnes and some other guys. He saw it as crime is crime. Let's all get together, and he knew that they could push drugs in their communities. A white guy couldn't go to Harlem in the 60s and sell drugs on the corner. It's just not going to happen. Just like a white guy couldn't sell drugs on the corner in East New York back in the fucking 70s. But East New York was a fucking war zone. So the idea that they may know each other, sure, absolutely. But any sort of affiliation criminally, absolutely fucking not. Absolutely not. All right. Is the Los Angeles mob family still active? No. They have essentially a Gambino conglomerate that is out there, and I'm sure there's Lucchese's and Columbos and a bunch of other little subgroups, but one universal family, absolutely not. All right, has the WWE, WWF, Vince McMahon Sr. or Jr. ever been involved with the mafia? What about Gino Marella? Does he have mob ties? Okay, if you don't know who Gino Marella is, he was Gorilla Monsoon. To my knowledge, absolutely, he has some connections through cousin lines. I'm not going to say their name just out of respect, but he has serious mob connections through cousins and marriages. As far as Vincent McMahon Sr., first of all, you got to understand something. Think about the time period that wrestling hits. It's the fucking late 70s, early 80s, Madison Square Garden at the time Vince McMahon Sr. owned the territory. Of course, he was given mafia kickbacks. You could not do an event like that in Madison Square Garden and not give a kickback. That's the reality of doing business in a territory. As far as Vince McMahon Jr., I would assume that probably having taken over his father's company at a relatively young age during the time period. We're talking the 80s here in New York. I'm sure there were massive kickbacks, especially with the unions that come in and do the drinks selling, the T-shirts. So I'm sure there was a great deal of kickbacks that definitely went back in that time period. First of all, I can say this for 100% fact. I know that when WWE Wrestling went to Providence, there were huge kickbacks. They couldn't come to Providence without a kickback. I know that for a fucking fact. New York, I would assume, is exactly the same way. You're not going to come here and sell out Madison Square Garden and not give the mafia a kickback. All the unions that they had to use to set up the event, all the unions to sell tickets, all the unions for the beverage company, the fucking waitresses, the waiters, and all that shit. Where there's a union, there's money. And who owns those unions, or who did in the 80s? Who owned all of those unions? So if you do the math, it's not impossible to understand how that sort of went away. But I think the mafia definitely controlled a lot of what WWE and WWF did in the 80s, especially in New York, especially in Rhode Island. Other places, probably not so much. All right. Who was the most feared, most dangerous out of these Irish hoodlums? Mad Dog Sullivan, Mickey Featherstone, Jimmy Burke, Eddie Comiskey, Danny Green, Whitey Bulger, and Jimmy Coonan. First of all, that's a fucking impressive list. I'm amazed at the list. I don't know if I could really pick one over the other. If I had to go just in this particular instance of most feared, I would use fear as the objective of, if you don't do what this guy says, he's gonna fucking kill you. I don't think anybody was as big as Jimmy Burke. That's the truth, because Jimmy Burke just didn't have Irish guys. He had the Italians. A lot of these other guys, like Mad Dog Sullivan, he was a tough guy. Mad Dog Sullivan had a lot of eyes that didn't like him. Mickey Featherstone sort of had the kind of same... Mickey Featherstone was sort of... what's the word for it? This guy was an enigma. He was a one-man machine. Problem is that Jimmy Burke came with an army. Eddie Comiskey, another fucking big killer. Jimmy Burke comes with an army. Danny Green, absolutely fucking crazy. Took it to the Italians' ass in Ohio. Wasn't afraid to use fucking grenades. Wasn't afraid to blow shit up. Protected his neighborhood. Danny Green, in a lot of ways, is an Irish hero for a lot of Irish people, but Danny Green also, at some point, your longevity ends, you get a little too loose, and you get killed, and ultimately they got him. But believe me, Danny Green decimated the mob in Ohio. Whitey Bulger, another fucking psychopath who I've met briefly as a kid. He was an absolute fucking nice guy, but you could just tell wasn't the one to try. But I think ultimately the most feared was probably Jimmy Burke. The most dangerous, though, I think was probably Whitey Bulger in a lot of ways. Because Whitey Bulger would not hesitate. Maybe I'm giving a rat too much credit, but it's those eyes. The eyes don't lie. Me and my attorney always joke. You want to spot a psychopath? Just look at their eyes. Their eyes give them away every time. All right. Do you feel all the major players, bosses, etc., fell in line with the no drugs policy for a fact? Carlo Gambino. Okay. Do you feel all major players, bosses, and etc. fell in line with the no drugs policy when, in fact, Carlo Gambino's cousins controlled the heroin coming in and out, and they didn't want the ripple effects of that affecting the machine? Okay, so basically you're asking, and I think, and I could be wrong, is the reason why they said that there was a no-selling drugs edict, was it to protect, really, at the end of the day, their rackets, and they didn't want what was going on to be fucked up by a bunch of other people? I think that's a legitimate question, and I think that's a legitimate, absolutely good point to make. First of all, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more today, Paul Castellano, don't sell drugs. Yet his cousins, the Rosario Gambino and them guys, are in Jersey City selling drugs. You got Roy Demeo selling drugs. You got Gene Gotti, or excuse me, not Gene Gotti. Oh, yeah, Gene Gotti. You got Jeannie Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero allegedly selling drugs too. Everybody's doing it. So the question becomes, was it that they didn't want it done because they already had who they wanted in doing it, and too many people selling drugs brought too much heat? I would agree in this very instance, especially when it comes to the Gambinos, this is probably exactly why they outwardly said no drug dealing. They had the Gambinos in New Jersey handling it. They didn't want to fuck up everything else for everybody. So that, to me, that makes perfect sense. However, I also think that it goes back to what Luciano said. I don't want bosses selling drugs because it brings too much heat. Let the Sicilians come over. Let them sell it. In turn, we'll protect them. We'll give them a piece of rackets. No American mob boss should ever touch drugs. It's too much heat. So I think it's kind of both. But I think the reality of that situation is more than likely that Paul Castellano didn't want the 5 or 6 guys he had doing that to be in competition with anybody else in the family. If you've got 6 guys doing it kind of quietly to the side, no big deal. But when you add fucking Angelo Ruggiero, Gene Gotti, and Dominic Montiglio and Roy DeMeo and all these other fuckers doing it, it just creates havoc and a big problem. And then to the other end of that is you end up having disputes and territory beefs. Who wants that? So I think it's an all-encompassing answer, but I think that the person who asked this is absolutely right. I think it had more to do with upsetting the ebb and flow of things than it did some moral compunction about doing it itself. All right, Milwaukee history. I'm not going to cover that. That's going to have to be a show in and of itself. Okay. Are the words syndicate and mafia interchangeable, or does the word syndicate refer to a group of gangsters of Italian and or non-Italian heritage who work with various families? The mob's been called a lot of things. The Black Hand, the Left Hand, the Outfit, La Cosa Nostra, the Syndicate. People just call themselves different things. It's not necessarily... Listen, it's all organized crime, so it really fits kind of under one umbrella. All right. Is it possible... Ooh, this is a good one. All right. Is it possible all the time our government has spent infiltrating the families, led our government to behave the way that they do now? How is our government acting any better than mobsters? That's an excellent point. I think that when the government spends hundreds of millions of dollars going after John Gotti, right, and then they use the testimony of rats, which we talked about earlier, and then they sort of turn a blind eye to the morality of the informant because the ends justify the means, then they are essentially becoming gangsters themselves. There is a huge problem with society when someone who fucking molests a child gets 3 years in prison and someone who sells fucking an eighth of marijuana gets 25 years. I'm not advocating for drugs. I'm just simply saying that you molest a child, you should be killed immediately. There is no pass go. There is no getting out and going on a list. You are going to die. But what happens? These fucking sick mutt rat fucks touch a kid. They do their 3 years. They come out. They get put on a little list. And what do? They fucking molest again and again and again. I will give someone fucking $1,000 if they can bring me a case where a child molester has never done it a second time, where it's one and done. You can't do it. You won't do it because it's not fucking possible. These people are repeat offenders. So, once again, if you're going to argue the morality with me of, all right, a guy killed 19 guys, he's going to rat on another guy, so he's going to get a cushier deal. I get it. Mob guys kill mob guys. That's the reality. But then there's certain situations where the government is effectively, like I said, trading morality for a conviction rate. Why do they want a conviction rate? Because they want to run for fucking public office like that fucking Nosferatu Rudy Giuliani, who I can't fucking stand. For my own fucking reasons. First of all, Rudy Giuliani's father was a gangster. His father participated in an armed robbery. His father participated in a mob fucking hit. And Rudy Giuliani goes after the whole entire fucking mob, right? Then he fucking becomes Merlino de fucking da. Now look at him. Now he's acting like a mob lawyer. And listen, if you like Rudy Giuliani, that's fine. My beef with Rudy Giuliani has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with the fact that he's a fucking hypocrite. He goes after the whole entire hierarchy of the mafia. His own father was a goddamn gangster. What does he do when he wins fucking political office? He watches Goodfellas and The Godfather back to back with all his little fucking constituents so they can rub off on each other. That's the point. Don't be a fucking hypocrite. Giuliani was a fucking dictator. He's a scumbag. And I don't care if anybody disagrees with me, but I'm speaking from a gangster side of things, not from a political thing. So if you're going to say, oh, he must not like Trump, that's why he's hating on Giuliani, absolutely has nothing to do with it. I tend to judge the character of a man, and I've watched what Giuliani has done to multiple and hundreds of families through his actions against the mob and alleged mafia, but yet sort of doesn't ever talk about his father and what his father's a fucking leg breaker. So he's a hypocrite in every sense of the imagination. But like I said, it's a morality argument. The government is willing to sort of shut their left eye to the fucking shit that's going on as long as the right eye gets what it wants. And that's the reality. So I totally agree. I think that the government really has become corrupt. The FBI especially has become fucking gangsters. If you need further evidence of that, I refer you back to one of my old shows where I talked about the Joey Merlino trial. I have never in my life seen this kind of shit, where the FBI essentially lies. The FBI more or less surreptitiously invents things. Listen, J.R. Rubio, what was it, 90 days of 104 or 120, something like that? He wasn't supervised? How do you not supervise somebody? Greg Scarpa killed people while he was under the government supervision. Whitey Bulger, under government supervision, killed people. So at what point do you not hold the FBI accountable for those crimes that happen under their watch? All right, John Connolly paid for it. Lindell Vecchio, who's still fucking delusional about what he did, paid for it to some extent. But that's the thing. You can't sit there and look and point at a fucking gangster and say, you're going to hell, everything you've done is horrible. The FBI let these guys do this. So everybody needs to be culpable. And the same argument I can fucking make right here and now. Remember the argument I made earlier? We all get in the car together to go rob the fucking bank? Why aren't the FBI guys arrested? To even further that, when Joey Merlino gets fucking indicted for medical fraud, how come not a single fucking doctor was arrested? How come not a fucking single doctor who wrote a fucking script lost their fucking license? How come not a single doctor was called to testify or was indicted or paid a fine? Think about that. Listen, I'm not just telling you because it's my narrative, because Joey's my friend and he's innocent of everything as far as I'm concerned. Public fact, not a doctor was fucking pinched. Not a check was written in Joey's name. So the reality is how you going to say this guy took X, Y, and Z when there's no goddamn proof of it? Oh, wait, that's right. I forgot. J.R. Rubio's a saint. He's a junkie, a wife beater, a piece of shit rat who did nothing but lie day after day after day after day after day. And apparently he got Twitter and decided to take a run at me like a fucking dunce. Fuck him. Fuck everything about him. Fuck his whole family. A bunch of rats. So that's my point. Is like, listen, if I was just making an argument because I like somebody, that would be one thing. But this is like fact, public knowledge. So take what you want from it. By the way, that was a great question. I would love to get more questions about that. Anytime I can fucking rail on the government a little bit, I'm going to do it. All right. Between Carmine Galante and Albert Anastasia, who had more enemies? Probably Carmine Galante. Anastasia may have had enemies, but nobody was going to go near that guy and fuck with him for any reason. So I think probably Carmine Galante, really at the end of the day, did. Who became more greedy in their quest for total power, Galante or Anastasia? Galante, hands down, really thought he was going to be something more than he was. And ultimately, it was his greed that got him killed. And whose death was more significant? I think Albert Anastasia's death was more significant because it totally changed the makeup of what would become the Carlo Gambino crime family. It ultimately ended Murder, Inc., which was pretty much already on its way out anyway. But when you kill the Lord High Executioner, the Mad Hatter, whatever you want to call him, when you take out Anastasia, you're losing a feared guy like times 100,000. This guy wouldn't hesitate, and that signaled a huge change in the way that the crime family was going to behave, and it did. Not only under Gambino did they make a lot more money, but they went very much underground, and they made inroads into construction. They made inroads into the garment district. Construction, I already said that, and et cetera, et cetera. That was a huge hit for a multitude of reasons. Which death caused more ripple effects? Really, I don't think either one caused ripple effects. Not tremendously. I think the Anastasia one caused ripple effects because Neil Delacroce was very upset with that happening. He was an old school guy that believed you didn't take out a boss, so he had issues with Gambino, and ultimately, Gambino ends up bringing him along, and they don't have a problem. But I think there was always a mistrust there, and that's exactly why when Carlo died, he didn't hand it to Delacroce. He handed it to Paul Castellano instead, because there was always sort of an uneasy tension between the two of them because of that. But Delacroce always believed a boss is a boss is a boss, and that's the way he lived his life. And so that's why I feel like there were probably more ripple effects from Anastasia than anything. Okay. Any idea where Joey Massino is? Is he in WITSEC? Yes, he's in WITSEC, witness protection. No, I don't know where he is. Don't care where he fucking is. It is what it is. All right. The more powerful, ruthless boss / family. Frank Ballesteri or Raymond Patriarca? Most powerful of the two of them, Ray Patriarca. Most ruthless, Ray Patriarca. Between Angelo Bruno and Sam DiCavalcante, DiCavalcante was absolutely more ruthless than Angelo Bruno, but I don't think he was as powerful as Angelo Bruno. I think Angelo Bruno had more power because Angelo Bruno had the connections to New York. All right, the Gagliano family versus the old Profaci family. Gagliano family, hands down. Joe Bonanno versus Joe Zarelli. Joe Zarelli, oh man. Joe Bonanno ultimately had more power and was more ruthless than Zarelli was, hands down. All right, Carlos Marcello versus Tony Accardo. The more ruthless of the two is Tony Accardo. Oh, man, that's a tough one. Carlos Marcello was really ruthless, too. It's a tough one. All right, most ruthless, Tony Accardo. Most powerful, I think, was Carlos Marcello at the time that he was in power, just because of the political connections and everything that he was related to. Okay, worst boss, Genovese versus Scarfo versus Castellano versus Colombo. The worst boss between Genovese, Scarfo, Castellano, and Colombo has got to be Nicky Scarfo. He killed everybody. Didn't have ration. He killed a fucking horse, for Christ's sakes. I've talked about this story. I was at a social club the other night. A bunch of us are sitting out drinking coffee, smoking cigars, and we're just talking about old times and myths and legend. And I tell the story of these guys. And keep in mind, these are all good guys and, hardworking guys or whatever. And I tell the story of Nicky Scarfo. He's riding the fucking horse. The horse kicks him off. Nicky Scarfo has the horse taken to a fucking bluff and shoves the prick off the fucking cliff, like the horse kicked him off intentionally. The laughter that came from those guys, they couldn't believe it. They all was cracking up. It's a funny story. It's demented because you're killing a fucking animal, but still, it's funny in a macabre kind of way. Other worst boss, Castellano was atrocious. Colombo was a joke, just because There's a lot of reasons for that one. Okay, why are rats so common in the mob these days? Why do so many people glorify them? Well, people glorify them because they don't know any better. A lot of people that I see that glorify the rats, and I could sit here and name them all, but I'm not going to do that. They glorify them because they don't understand the life. They see the mob from a picture booth. They see the mob from a carnival type of viewfinder. They see the mob from the Godfather, Goodfellas perspective. They don't know any gangsters. They didn't grow up around the life, so they don't know any better. They think because Sammy Gravano at one point was a made guy and a tough guy that he's a fucking legend. You may have been a legend at one point, but everything you did after the fact sort of negates that. Another thing, Sammy the Bull, his name ain't the Bull because of that bullshit story he told about beating some kid up over a bike. He's from Bull's Head, Staten Island. That's where the Bull comes from. So he is full of bullshit, as we say. But I think the reason why rats are so common these days, it's a generational gap. A lot of these guys that are young, I'm talking very young guys, they didn't have to, and I've said it before, they didn't have to fight for where they got. There's a big difference between coming over here and going through the Depression, having 6 siblings, your father dies, your mother can't work, you have to take care of your fucking family somehow. So you do what you got to do. All right, that was then, this is now. They didn't have welfare like that back then. Now, these guys grow up, they come from wealthy families, they got something fucking wrong with their brain, they decide to go to the streets. I'm not saying everybody that makes that decision is like that, but I'm just saying if you did a psychological breakdown, it doesn't make sense. If you were brought up in that life, it makes perfect sense. That's all you know, that's all you see, that's all you aspire to be. Totally makes sense from that perspective. But when the government makes it easy for you to get government absolution for your crimes and you don't have to pay a penalty or a fine, then why not tell? Think about it. You could kill 20 people, keep all your fucking illegal monies, but if you tell on Tommaso Rosiello, sorry Tommaso, I don't, you were on my mind for some reason. But if you tell on Tommaso Rosiello or Seth Nicoletti, you're gonna get all your time taken away, and you're not going to do a day in jail, keep all your monies, and go live in fucking Omaha and bang cocktail waitresses that make $2 an hour. Listen, it makes sense to me. I'm not saying it's right, but it makes sense. And that's exactly why they're doing it, because the government has made it available and easy to do. And that's the reality. And people glorifying them, listen, they're always going to do that because people don't know any better. The ones that continue to glorify these rats and put them up on pedestals would shit their fucking pants with some of the people that I know. Believe me, they would shake in their fucking cowboy boots or whatever the fuck it is they wear, their Birkenstocks. They would shit their pants with some of the people that I know. Because I think that there's a nostalgia and there's the way that average people look at gangsters. They don't understand it. But they want to be around it because it's intoxicating. They got money, cars, women, houses, blah, 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 this and that and the third. But the first time that fucker you envy gets upset with you, that's a whole nother ball game. You're not dealing with fucking Mr. McFeely from fucking Mr. Rogers. You're dealing with a guy that's going to pick up a fucking pen in a bar and shove it through your fucking thorax 100 times. All the while singing zippity-doo-dah like he doesn't give a fuck. That's the reality that people don't get. I love the people that fucking reach out to me and they say, oh, I wrote to Tommy Patera and we were having a great conversation and we've exchanged very personal letters, but now I'm afraid because he says he hates me and he's going to do something. What the fuck? First of all, what the fuck you writing to him to begin with? Second of all, what the fuck do you expect? You're not dealing with fucking. Oh God, let's come up with a scenario here. You're not dealing with like just some average gangster who just conveniently has never hurt anybody and is just involved in the rackets. You're not dealing with that guy. You're fucking dealing with a guy that put a fucking head in a fridge. And every morning, good morning, Phyllis, how are you? This is a guy that chopped a broad's head off and put it in his fucking fridge. Hello? What do you expect? That's not gangster. That's serial killer shit. I'm just being honest with you. But what do you think? You sit down with somebody, you know what the papers say. You know what people say about this guy, but you look at him and go, he doesn't look so evil, until he looks at you, points a fucking finger at you and says, you know what? I've done this 11 times, One more is not going to affect me in the slightest, and they're dead serious. That's the reality. So people don't understand the reality. It's all fun and games. It's all cute until the motherfucker bangs on your door or till you got a problem. And then you know what people do when that happens? They run to the cops because they get scared. Oh, I should call the FBI. He's angry at me. What the fuck did you write him for? The fuck do you even get involved for? Don't get involved. Don't be around it if you can't handle the consequences. That's the reality. All right. Any idea when Frankie Locke is going to get out of prison? He's 85. He's doing life in Devens, I believe. That's where he is. Devens FCI. He's not getting out. Done deal. All right. Do you think if John Gotti didn't have Paul Castellano clipped, do you think Paul would have ratted? Well, that was the concern. We're going to find out what Paul gets indicted for here on the second half of our show. And there's going to be a really good argument for me. Did Gotti really need to clip Castellano to begin with? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Do I think Paul would have ratted? No. Listen, I can say a lot of things about Paul Castellano that I didn't like from an archetype. I didn't know him, so anything that I say about him is just from how I would do it. If I was going to do it, this is how I feel about it. I don't think Paul would have ratted. I really don't think that was a Paul move. So I think for that being a justification, no. I don't even think John Gotti would have even thought that Paul was going to tell. But I think that if you're looking for a reason to kill a prick, I think you want to put some seeds of doubt in some motherfuckers' heads, you absolutely say that. Yeah, I don't know. Paul's going to do 100 years here. He might talk. I think that's Mob 101. Put the seeds of doubt. I cannot tell you how many street guys I know, that were in my family, that would put whispers, then we call it putting whispers on the street. Whispers on the street, maybe there's another euphemism people use for it, but it's like putting thoughts into somebody's head, controlling the narrative. You tell one guy, I heard the strangest fucking story. Joey Peeps, he was talking to a cop. By the time it gets to the big mouth on the block, the broad who picks up the phone and tells everybody and their fucking mother what the gossip is, now he's an informant. Especially if you don't like that guy, if you want him out of the way, maybe he's competition for you, maybe he's a prick, maybe he banged your sister, I don't know. Whatever the case may be. Maybe he looked at your mother sideways when she had a sundress on. I don't fucking know. Maybe you want him gone. That's how you put the whispers in the street. And then all of a sudden it becomes something else. Then it eventually comes back to you and you say, yeah, I think he's a fucking rat. Next thing you know, he's gone. That's how it begins. That's a big part of the problem. That's in a lot of different mob subcultures, is the whispers on the streets. And guys who employ that, I've used it myself. So guys who employ that tactic are trying to get something done. And it happens. All right. Blah, 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 blah. All right. I'm about to listen to the Gaspipe Casso audiobook, which was written by Philip Carlo. Should I just skip this or listen to it? Is there any point to listening to this, or is this guy just a liar? Listen, I didn't know Philip Carlo. God rest his soul. He had a horrible disease which took him at a very young age. He was a very gifted writer, but this is where I sort of drift off. Talent-wise, incredible writer, had a great gift. Telling the truth, not so much. And the reason why I say that is it's not that he's directly lying, and this is another grand sort of argument or discussion that I have with a lot of people in my world, is that at what point do these mob authors, your George Anesthesia, your Jerry piece of shits, your Selwyn Rabs, your TJ Englishes, your Scott Deitch, I think I pronounced Scott's Deitch. I think I pronounced his name right. I think it's German. I could be wrong. Scott, forgive me. But I don't put Scott in that category of guys who make shit up. I don't put Selwyn Rab in that category of people that make shit up. However, your George Anesthesias and your Jerry piece of shits sort of do this. Jerry, not so much. With a couple of exceptions to that. He didn't tell the truth about John Gotti at all. He's fabricated some stuff and taken information from rats and called it fact, which is not true. But then I can make an argument that Jerry did come out several times calling rats out for lying. And so that sort of makes me let it go, some of the shit that I don't like about him, and some of the personal shit that he did to me, like having the FBI bang down my fucking door. amongst other things. But as far as writers in general, it's impossible to get the story 100% unless you're standing there right when Jimmy Burke waxed Tommy DeSimone. All right? If you weren't there, you didn't hear the context of the conversation verbatim, you're not related to somebody who was intimately there, then really you can't reproduce the truth. You can go off what court testimony is, which we all know is sort of bullshit. You can go off what rats say, which we know is completely full of shit. We can go off what the government says, which is skewed and levied towards their end of believability, which is bullshit. So it really comes down to, is Philip Carlo really lying? Well, no, he's not. He's paraphrasing events that were described to him through court documents, records, etc., etc. So he's not lying, but the information that he's been provided, he wraps a story around. So it's not necessarily lies, but it's not the truth either. I can even say this about myself. Unless I'm standing next to, oh God, whose fucking name do I want to drop and get killed for mentioning? Okay, I'll use this. This is a better. If I'm standing next to my attorney, Elio Forcina, and he's having a conversation with, we'll just say, this other guy, all right? If I'm there and I'm listening to the context of the conversation, I sort of know what's going on. I can sort of write an article about that because I was standing there. I know what the basis is. Do I really know how they both feel about each other? No. I can kind of guess that by the way they're looking and acting and interacting together and the tone of their voice. Okay, so that's more accurate. However, if I'm sitting across the street and the same conversation goes on and I can't hear the words but I see the mannerisms, then I can actually write a story that isn't even close to being fucking accurate. They're waving at each other. One guy's motioning with his hands like he's upset, and all of a sudden it becomes something else. Now, take those same two guys and make them both mob-connected guys. Do you see how that can get lost in translation? Okay, so Philip Carlo isn't lying, but he also didn't talk to Tommy Patera. He also makes some assertions that are incredibly fucking wrong and not accurate. That is on his end. You cannot, if you're going to make a guess or you're going to make an educated guess based on criminality or based on mob or based on what you think happened, that's one thing. But to just sort of like throw it out there and hope it sticks to the wall and smells good enough to pass the smell test, that's wrong. So the one thing that I try to do is if it comes down to a conversation between guy A and guy B, unless I'm standing there, I will paraphrase a conversation and say, this is what was overheard, this is what it could have been about. That's one thing. But if somebody directly involved with it, who is actually standing there, tells me, then I'm going to report what they tell me. Now, is that the exact truth? No, because it's like the telephone game. I tell fucking Tommy one thing, Tommy tells Chris another thing. By the time he gets back to Angel, it's totally fucked up. And by the time he gets to me, next thing you know, I'm blowing a fucking circus clown. You know what I mean? So that's the fucking reality of it, is that unless you're standing there and see it from all angles, you really can't be accurate. But he is a good writer, so I will say that for him. Your George Anastasias, on the other hand, write total nonsense, bullshit, and lies, and he knows it, and that's worse. That's the worst of the damaging shit when you're an author. When you write lies, and you know you're writing lies. Because at what point, who the fuck are you benefiting? Yourself? Your ego? Your pocketbook? Yeah, probably the FBI, of course. Why do you think he stands outside the social clubs and points at Georgie and says, oh, this guy, George Borghese, he does this, and this guy does this, and fucking Steve Mazzone, and Sonny Mazzone, and this guy, and that guy, and the third guy, and the fourth guy? Why do you think he does that? One, he's trying to help the fucking FBI. That's the first thing. B, if he can put the thought in your fucking head for 1 minute that George Borghese is some fucking kind of animal, then you're going to buy whatever he says next. And that's the truth. And that's what I always try to do on my show. I just try to dispel the myth from the fucking truth. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. If I'm guessing, I'm going to say, look, if I got to make an educated guess, this is what I think. That's fine. I always preface it, even in my articles. I think doesn't mean fact. It means based on my knowledge of the streets, based on my knowledge of mob life, based on my own experiences, this is probably what is going to happen. And I'm like over 90% right most of the time. Very rarely am I fucking wrong. And when I am wrong, what do? I say it. That's better than all of them combined, because none of them do that shit. None of them say, you know what, I was wrong. No, instead, what they do is say, well, there was misinformation on the streets. It came from a rat. The same fucking people they used to write these goddamn fucking books are the ones they blame when it comes back to bite them in the fucking ass. That snaggletooth prick Anastasia. Ugh. Anyway, all right. So let's see. All right. I'm 100%. This is the last question, by the way. And then we're going to take a break. We'll come back to get to Nino Gaggi. All right. I'm 100% against ratting, but in the cases of Mickey Featherstone of the Westies and Kevin Weeks of Boston, both seem to be really solid guys for their organization for the most part, but both were essentially stabbed in the back. With Mickey Featherstone, it was Jimmy Coonan who set him up for a murder he didn't do. With Kevin Weeks, it was Whitey Bulger. Was there really any other way for these guys to get their payback, or was really ratting their only option? And I don't want people to think that I'm supporting ratting on any certain kind of level. That's a really good question. How do you get payback? You be a fucking man and you go to jail. Kevin Weeks is a fucking dog, a fucking coward. He can sit there on the stand and point at everybody else and say, oh yeah, Whitey was a rat and all of this. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make... He ratted on me, so I ratted on him. Doesn't make it right. Kevin Weeks joined the fucking Westies, was involved in Irish organized crime in Boston and in Providence. He killed people for Whitey Bulger, John Moderano. These guys all killed because of what they believed in. So what I can't do is make an argument saying what other choice did they have. Fuck them. Listen, you commit murder under the fucking guise of an organization you freely choose to fucking join. You have no problem shaking down people, getting those VIG payments. You got no problem fucking selling dope, cracking skulls. So somebody tells on you and your only recourse is to tell on them back? Like, seriously? That's like fucking junior high school, elementary. He touched me first. That's why I popped him in the head with a hammer. It's bullshit. Mickey Featherstone was a little different, but same reaction. Mickey Featherstone killed motherfuckers on his own accord. He didn't need nobody to tell him to do it. He's, fuck this, time to kill. Boom, boom, boom. Because he had a mental fucking problem. The guy certifiably had a fucking mental problem. And he served in Vietnam, by the way. Killed a bunch of people there. But what I can't make an argument for is, was there any other way for them to get payback? Well, at that point, payback's kind of over. You pay for your crimes, you go away. I understand from a certain caveman type brain that, all right, you all joined this thing together. This guy got caught. Now he's going to tell on me. I'm going to do all the time while this guy takes off. I can understand the frustration. I can understand how somebody can be led to that. And people say this shit to me all the time. Well, if you were in that situation, you don't know what you do. Yeah, I do. Let me tell you what the fuck I would do. I'd put a bullet in my fucking head. That's what I would do. If it came down to me getting told on, doing the rest of my life in a fucking cell, I would rather kill myself than testify against a soul. I would rather kill myself than to fucking turn on anybody. I'd rather kill myself than testify. Because you know what? My honor, my respect, and my loyalty far supersedes any sort of fucking payback. Any sort of payback. That's how I would do it. And anybody that says to you, oh yeah, he says that shit, trust me. Ask anybody that knows me. I'd put one in my fucking head before I ever fucking told a soul. Or guess what? I would just go to prison and say, so be it. And I would find other ways to get back at somebody, like kill his whole fucking entire family. Which I really wouldn't do. I'm offering another suggestion besides the fucking bullet. Or besides like ratting. There is no honor. Zero honor in telling on someone. These guys like your Michael Franceses, your fucking Kevin Weeks, your fucking Bobby DeLucas can all go to Jesus and say, oh, I'm a Jesus guy now, and that was my past. You go to your John VCs and say, oh, this was just my fucking past. Meanwhile, every single one of these pricks is still breaking the law. John VC called the wives of former mobsters, threatened to kill him how many fucking times? It was all over the fucking news. I'm going to come back to fucking Philly, and I'm going to fucking, one day I'm going to avenge my brother, and everybody's going to fucking die. Who threatens a woman like that? Be a fucking man, go to South Philly, go knock on a guy's door, and blow his fucking head off if that's how you feel. Don't talk about it, be about it. I get so sick of these guys all fucking mouthing off. That fat fucking pile of shit, Ron Previty. Same kind of fucking thing. Running his fucking yapper on a fucking video about, well, I'm still Shylocking, I'm still making book. I'm always going to be a degenerate, fat fucking gambler, piece of shit. But Joey Merlino thought he was going to get over on me. Yeah, you see? Because that's the way that fat, miserable prick talked. Guy's a scumbag. Listen, you know the thing about Ron Previty? He didn't have no fucking money. All these shenanigans of, I was a huge loan shark and Shylock guy, and I brought all the money, and Stanford loved it, and fucking Natalie loved it, and then I decided Joey would love it. The government was giving him the jewelry, the fucking money. He was not capable of making it himself. Right? So if the government's giving you X, Y, and Z, and you're trying to impress Joey Merlino, you're trying to impress Ralph Natali, which, fuck him. You're going to try to impress these guys with something the government's giving you. You're not a fucking earner. You're a scumbag. So it all comes back to this idea. There is no honor amongst thieves, right? There is no honor in telling on anybody. Listen, if we all enter the fucking mall together and we all leave together, whatever happens in the fucking mall, we're all fucking responsible for. Anybody ever get into a fight with a kid, 5 guys versus 5 guys? Happened all the time in my neighborhood. 5 guys beat the shit out of the 5 guys. The problem was you never had fucking, of the 5 guys fighting, you never had the other 4 turn and point, he started it, he threw the rock. No, everybody shut the fuck up and they went about their day. You don't get fucking, what do these guys want? Fucking Happy Meals? Happy Grams for fucking ratting? I ratted, give me my star, I want my star, I ratted, I was a good boy. Fuck you. You're a rat. You're the lowest thing on fucking earth. You're below a junkie. I didn't think that was possible. You're below a fucking junkie. Now, I'm going to shut the fuck up because we got to get to Nino Gaggi, and I've gone on for like an hour and a half screaming about shit that's going to come back to haunt me. And you know why it's going to come back to haunt me? Let me tell you why. Because some fucking miserable fuck is going to listen to this, and they're going to take it completely different 90 degrees. All I'm saying is there's no honor in ratting. There is none. Take a pinch, be a man. If you can't take the pinch, blow your head off. Do yourself and your fucking family a favor. That may be cold, that may be callous, but there is honor in dying for something you believe in. There is zero honor in telling on other people, especially when you all wore the same steel dildos. Come on. I mean, I hate to be fucking gruesome about it, but it's hard for me to take this shit that seriously. Come on. We're all going to go rob the bank together. We're all going to go do time together. Great. But it's always one motherfucker. Always one in the group that talks the biggest shit about, I can do time. Fuck them. Fuck the government. Boy, but the minute they hear 20 years, their fucking asshole fucking locks up like a fucking bank vault door and they start crying like a bitch. They don't want to be somebody's bitch. And what do? They drop a dime. And it ain't just the 4 guys he's testifying against. It's their 4 children, their 4 grandchildren that are going to come down the pike at some point, all their fucking relatives, all their friends. And listen, make no mistake about it. Anybody that gets involved in crime has got what's coming to you. Your job is to break laws. The cop's job is to arrest you for breaking them laws. That's the reality of it, right? So that's the way I see it. I see it very black and white. It's this or it's this. What I can't see under any circumstances is telling on somebody. And anybody that, and I see it, listen, and I'm going to shut up after this, but a lot of people say, well, they're all criminals, they should all be in jail. All right, fair enough. You're not going to get an argument out of me. But putting a rat on a pedestal just ain't cutting it. He did the government a good job. He did a favor for the government. So Sammy Gravano did a favor for the government. All right, so he admits to 19 murders. John Gotti, who they would want to call a terrorist, apparently, who didn't murder hundreds of people, didn't murder 19 people like Sammy, didn't kill a fucking 17-year-old kid like Sammy did, didn't go and sell drugs to fucking kids like Sammy did. And Sammy's the fucking hero? Like, seriously? On what fucking level? I don't get it. I would respect people more if they said, look, all criminals go to jail. That's the end of it. There shouldn't be a reward system for telling. There really shouldn't. And that's that. So, all that being said, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk about Nino Gaggi. Stay tuned for Mob Talk Radio. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta brand Clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta brand clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. I am Jeff Canarsie, and we are going to talk about Nino Gaggi. But really quickly, you can follow us at Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Send me a message there if you want to communicate with me directly. Check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. Send us a message, complaint, threat, blah, 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 blah. I think that's pretty much it. I try to communicate with everybody as much as I can, but I get hundreds of messages a day. It's impossible to keep up, and a lot of people ask the same questions. So until I can bring somebody in to kind of handle some of that for me, it'll always be my voice you hear, but it may be someone else typing it. I can't keep up with the volume. So all that being said, let's get to Anthony Nino Gaggi. Nino was born in 1925. His family immigrated from Palermo, Sicily, settling in Manhattan on the Lower East Side. In 8th grade, Nino quit school and follows his dad Angelo into the barbershop trade. He would also earn extra money on the side delivering flowers. As a teenager, his family would move to New Jersey after they purchased a small horse farm. But then in 1943, the family wasn't able to make ends meet, and they ended up coming back to Bath Beach, Brooklyn. Nino had a lot of mafia roots, which would sort of inspire him at a very young age. His second cousin was Frank Scalise, who was a founding member of the Gambino Crime Family. Through Scalise, Gaggi would actually obtain a job on the truck docks, where he surreptitiously became a supervisor very quickly. Eventually, that position became a no-show job, and Gaggi would use that sort of as a guise for tax purposes. He would go directly into loan sharking business, and he would frequent pool halls and Brooklyn bars to essentially loan shark. His no-show job was allowed him to false incorrect taxes, which enabled him to avoid the IRS at all costs, sort of a trick that he learned from his second cousin, Frank Scalise. In 1947, Gaggi's sister Marie gives birth to who we know as Dominic Montiglio. Dominic's father was Anthony Santamaria. He was a part-time boxer and a delivery guy, but he was very outspoken. And Nino particularly did not like that sort of shit. And he essentially chased Dominic's father out of town. So Dominic really never got a chance to know who his father was. Nino would then begin raise Dominic as sort of his son. In 1954, Nino Gaggi takes his first pinch. He gets charged with running an international auto theft ring, which was the first time he's charged with that. Obviously, if you know his story, you know that that's really going to be another thing he does multiple times. He was operating out of a used car lot in Brooklyn, and that ring was backed and protected by Frank Scalise, who at the time was the Gambino family underboss at the time. For 2 years, Gaggi and his associates fabricated bullshit registrations to non-existent Cadillacs. The crew would steal cars that matched the bullshit car registrations, and then they would replace the VINs with new VINs, which would also match the registrations. They'd also give these stolen cars new plates that would match the registrations. They would then sell the cars to Florida, Georgia, Rhode Island, Texas, and Mexico. The Rhode Island connection nobody knows about. I happen to know about that because my cousin Butchie owned a chop shop. And some of the cars that he sold came directly from that group. All that being said. All right, 1955, while his trial was underway for the auto theft ring, Nino would end up getting married. Also during the trial, witnesses would forget their previous testimony while on the stand, and Gaggi's co-defendants refused to testify against him. In 1956, ultimately, Gaggi would be acquitted of those charges. In 1957, the Gambinos underwent a huge shift. In June of that year, Frank Scalise was whacked at a fruit stand in the Bronx. In October, Albert Anastasia gets clipped. Gaggi's close friend Carlo Gambino would end up taking over the boss of the Gambino crime family. Gambino then in turn promoted Neil Delacroix, the underboss, and gave him the old Manhattan faction of the crime family. Now, what makes this interesting in 1957, it's the same year Appalachian happens, I believe, and also Frank Scalish getting murdered is not an accident. That's not a rival situation. I think that ultimately, and this is my opinion, and we've talked about this before, when I say it's my opinion, I base it on logic of the streets. Logic tells me that Carlo Gambino was the one who whacked Frank Scalish. Probably ultimately because once he gets Anastasia out of the way, Scalish would have been the one big problem that he had. Scalish may not have gone with the idea that Gambino was going to take over, so he effectively moves on Scalish first. Maybe it makes it look like Albert Anastasia did it. So it sort of buys Gambino time, and then he hits Anastasia like right afterwards. And so that's always been my long belief when it came to that. And it's not the first time Carlo Gambino did something like that either. In 1960, Gaggi makes his bones. He serves as a member of a hit squad who ends up murdering Vincent James Squilante, who they said was responsible for the hit on Frank Scalish. But the problem with that isn't that Squilante probably didn't do it. He probably did. I don't have an issue with that. But obviously, Gambino ordered the murder of Vincent Squilante for the murder of Frank Scalish. It doesn't take rocket science to kind of figure out that Carlo Gambino was behind all of it. He has to get rid of Squilante just so he doesn't talk. And he doesn't want Squilante going back and telling Gaggi that, hey, I killed your cousin. And what ends up happening is Squilante has ended up getting shot multiple times in the head, then got incinerated. And for his role in that murder, Nino Gaggi becomes an official made guy in the Gambino crime family. In the mid-'60s, Nino Gaggi had grown in power. He had a huge loan sharking operation going and was able to sort of become a silent partner in multiple businesses. To increase his money, he decided to go into a partnership with Roy Demeo. Demeo at the time had really cornered the market on pornography and had his own auto theft ring, which was based out of the Flatlands and out of Canarsie, Brooklyn. Demeo had deep connections within the Lucchese crime family, was a humongous earner, and had no issue with murder whatsoever. And Gaggi sort of looks at him and sees potential. Not only can the guy kill, but the guy can make an incredible amount of money. He's got his hands in everything. And Gaggi, more importantly, realizes how rich he can get off to Demeo, and he sort of talks Demeo into walking away from the Luccheses and joining the Gambinos. On one hand, it really helped the Gambinos that Demeo came along. It helped Demeo too. But I always wonder what would have happened if he'd have just stayed with the Lucchese crime family. I guess we're never going to know. So he ends up going to work directly for the Gambino crime family. As partners, Roy Demeo and Nino Gaggi begin making co-payment loans to loan shark customers. By 1970, Demeo officially is working for Nino Gaggi exclusively and was paying weekly tributes. Then in 1972, Gaggi and Demeo forced their way into an X-rated film distributorship. Demeo ends up shaking down Richard Kuklinski, who operated the film distributorship. This is Richard Kuklinski's only foray into the Gambino crime family. He was not a hitman for the Gambinos, was not a mob hitman in general. He was a fucking serial killer. Get that fucking straight, please. What was basically happening was Richard Kuklinski worked in a porn lab who was sort of distributing X-rated films, and what he was doing was early bootlegging of films. He was bootlegging them, putting them onto film strips, into whatever else, and he was selling them for a profit. Roy Demeo, kind of through somebody else, finds out about this and basically forces his fucking way into it, basically shakes down, beats the shit. They absolutely pummeled Richard Kuklinski to go along with this. They beat him senseless, and he agreed to go along with it, and that was their only interaction. Anything that's been said after the fact of that is bullshit, nonsense, and lies. So that is Richard Kuklinski's only relative in the mob world because of that particular instance. Now, the owner, Paul Rothenberg, who owned the porn distributorship, sort of caught wind that Roy Demeo and Nino Gaggi were kind of kicking around and getting kickbacks. And so basically he runs to the cops. And then in 1973, his building gets raided, and he decides, you know what, I need to tell them everything that's going on. And he effectively does. Nino Gaggi finds out about it, and he orders Roy Demeo to kill him, which Roy Demeo does not hesitate for a single fucking second. And so the Rothenberg murder was the first in a long line of murders that Roy Demeo would commit. Gaggi would order a lot more murders, but he would also participate in many of them as well. So he wasn't just a guy that was going to order it and just disappear. He would take part in half of them. Vincent Govanero was another one. He punched Nino like 10 years prior in the face, broke his nose. Nino never forgot it. Nino runs into him on the street. Next thing you know, Vincent Govanero's got to go, and he does. In 1976, Nino Gaggi kills George Byram. And George Byram was an electrical engineer who worked at Gaggi's Florida estate. Byram had tipped off sort of a bunch of thieves about the layout of the house, what was in it, and they ended up ransacking Gaggi's house. Once Gaggi finds out, then he ordered Demeo to bring Byram to him at a hotel in Miami. This is what's never been reported. If anybody's seen Scarface, you remember the scene of Al Pacino where he's shackled up in a shower and the guy takes a fucking chainsaw to the other guy. This is exactly what Gaggi does to Byram. He takes a fucking chainsaw to him while he's alive. They dismember him. They get rid of the body. In 1976, Carlo Gambino dies. The issue that was really starting was that Carlo ends up naming Big Paul Castellano the boss. It should have been Neil Delacroce by standards, but like I said earlier, part of the issue was he didn't trust Neil because it goes back to the Anastasia days, and he also felt that keeping the family in the bloodline was probably a smarter way to go, and he knew that Paul was not a ruthless boss and that he was more of a functional boss, financially speaking, and I think that he felt like he had given Paul the mold to just kind of keep it going straight. He was fucking wrong. The Manhattan faction was absolutely furious at the idea of it. In fact, there was a meeting at the house of Nino Gaggi to sort of discuss a couple of things. They were going to discuss Big Paul's promotion, and Castellano knew that there needed to be some sort of fence mended between himself and Neil Delacroce. Delacroce was a little pissed, but now Delacroce would go with whatever the boss said. But because he was so afraid of war and he knew the Manhattan faction was furious, what he does is he throws an olive branch, even though he did not want to. He ends up making Delacroce his underboss. Now, we see as things move along, ultimately Tommy Bellotti, for some fucking strange reason, gets in the mix. But at the time, that's what was agreed upon. And because of it, everyone accepts Paul as the new boss. As a result of being a good soldier, Nino Gaggi in return gets promoted to captain, and Paul gives him control of his old Brooklyn crew. Gaggi then requests that Roy Demeo get made, and Paul Castellano absolutely refuses the request. There were a couple of reasons why he refused it. One, he didn't want to open the books at the time. Two, he didn't trust Roy Demeo. He didn't know him that well. Three, he felt like Roy Demeo was way too violent and way too uncontrollable. He had no problem with the fucking money he was bringing in, but he just felt that the guy was out of control. However, 1 year later, Paul ends up changing his mind, and Roy Demeo gets inducted in the Gambino Crime Family, and that's in 1977. Demeo also entered into an alliance with the Westies. Now, this is another thing that people have a tendency to not understand. Okay, the Westies were operating on their own. It was Demeo who was friends with Jimmy Coonan, who sort of saw what they had and figured they could use a bunch of guys to give them more money and hit guys for them and stuff like that. So he makes the introduction, and there were some other things that were going on that they had clipped some made guys, and there was a problem. And basically DeMeo goes to Paul and says, look, here's the deal. We can control these guys. We can bring them in. They can make us a lot of money. We can offer them protection. Paul says, okay, yeah, that's fine with me, but here's the deal. You're going to supervise them, but the one rule is that these guys cannot commit any murder without my permission. It has to come from me. Because the Westies are under protection of the Gambino crime family, that's the way it was. Word is Roy Demeo never bothered to tell him. He just told them, do whatever the fuck you want, which was a mistake that would come back to haunt Roy Demeo in the end because the Westies ended up going fucking berserk and killing a bunch of people. And it also created a problem because Jimmy Coonan sort of started dressing like Italians, talking like the Italians, hanging out with the Italians, and his own crew felt like he was sort of worshiping the Italians and he had lost his ethnicity of being Irish, and it created a huge problem between him and Mickey Featherstone, which ultimately led to the demise of the Westies. Demeo would continue to expand, pretty much passing more and more money to Gaggi. Gaggi would expand his loan sharking empire even further. He even brings Dominic Montiglio sort of into the fold, which was a huge fucking mistake. Gaggi then takes Montiglio and puts him in charge of collecting the payments, collecting the tributes from Demeo as well. And the mistake is he's allowing... He's insulating himself. He's a captain now. He's making all kinds of money. So let's let Dominic collect the money. If he gets pinched, it's on him. Problem is Dominic didn't have the constitution to keep his mouth shut. And so bringing Montiglio in and allowing him to be privy to way too much information ultimately would have huge consequences for not just Nino, but Paul Castellano and the entire Gambino crime family. And ultimately, it would lead to John Gotti killing Paul Castellano, which we'll get into. In June of 1978, Nino Gaggi is indicted with 9 others and charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud as a result of a year-long federal investigation into the bankruptcy of a theater in New York. The evidence came from the wiretap conversations, which was a huge gift for Nino Gaggi because he never said anything incriminating on the tapes. And ultimately, he would be cleared of those charges. Then in 1979, Roy Demeo had expanded into loan sharking, murder for hire, and had an auto theft ring in full swing. Obviously, they were doing the same thing that Nino Gaggi was doing at a younger age, but this time they were taking the cars and shipping them in containers over to Kuwait. It was a multi-billion-dollar business for them. They made hand over foot. Gaggi was receiving a massive amount from that cash flow, along with Demeo's porn business, and also Demeo gets into drug trafficking, and Nino Gaggi is taking a huge kickback from that. Then the Demeo crew begins moving coke, heroin, pills, and marijuana in massive amounts. In 1979, Jimmy Ippolito, a captain, basically, this is where Nino Gaggi starts to have a problem. So does Roy Demeo. It's the beginning of sort of a problem that will lead to something else. All right, so Jimmy Ippolito, a captain, ends up running to Paul Castellano and basically tells him that Roy Demeo and Nino Gaggi were pushing drugs. Ippolito claimed that Demeo had robbed his son, who at the time was a Gambino soldier, and he robbed him basically in a drug deal. Ippolito also accused Nino Gaggi of being a rat talking to the police. Ippolito asked for permission from Paul Castellano to have Nino Gaggi and Roy Demeo killed. Castellano refused, and he essentially breaks his no policy on drugs rule, which is why this is important. And then Castellano says, no, I won't kill them. But then he turns around and tells Demeo and Gaggi and says, go ahead, you can kill the Ippolitos. And guess what happens? In 1979, Gaggi and Demeo shoot and kill both Ippolitos. And I'm going to get more into that. But here's why this is important. You've got Paul Castellano doing a couple things here. All right. 1, he's not supporting Neil Delacroce whatsoever. 2, Paul Castellano was never a street guy. 3, Paul Castellano is trying to move into legitimate enterprises, which isn't bad, but he doesn't seem to get it as far as the street shit goes. 4, he's got Roy Demeo and his crew essentially selling drugs, knowing they're selling drugs, ignoring that somebody's coming to him saying, listen, this guy's going to get us all fucking pinched because he's moving tons of fucking weight. Paul Castellano doesn't do anything. Instead, he kills the father and son, probably likely because they came to him and ratted somebody else out. I get it, a rat's a rat's a rat, you kill him. But Paul Castellano breaks his own rule. He breaks his own rule. First of all, he knows his cousins are selling drugs in Jersey. Okay? He knows that Gaggi and Demeo's are moving a ton of weight. Then you're going to have this Angelo Ruggiero shit that's going to come up. And he wants to bitch and complain to them. And the big thing there is he knows they're selling drugs, but he wants Angelo Ruggiero to give up the fucking tapes. First of all, Paul Castellano already had transcripts of the tapes. He knew what Angelo Ruggiero had already said. But Angelo is going to, scream till he's blue in the face that he's not going to give up them tapes because he talked about friends. I get it. So the whole idea here is Paul Castellano is only concerned about himself, which rightfully so at that point, correct? But he has no problem with Nino doing it, no problem with Roy doing it, but all of a sudden he has a problem with Angelo Ruggiero doing it. He's got no problem with his cousins doing it. So he's picking and choosing who he wants to fucking hold accountable for this. And that is a huge problem. And that's what made him a hypocrite. And that's what infuriated John Gotti. Was not only did he disrespect Neil, who he looked at like a father, but he's going to try to hold one guy accountable for the shit that everybody's fucking doing. And the heat that's getting brought on the Gambino crime family is because of Roy Demeo and Nino Gaggi, not because of John Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero. Sure, it's a drug case, I get it, but Nino brought so much heat because of Roy Demeo and this family that it was their direct bullshit that led the Gambino crime family down a path of destruction. It wasn't John Gotti. It was Nino Gaggi and Roy Demeo and Paul Castellano that fucking destroyed the Gambino crime family. Because this shit all started to go south before John Gotti ever took over as boss. So in 1979, Gaggi and Demeo shoot and kill both of the Ippolitos. The issue was there was somewhat of a witness. The witness flagged down an off-duty cop. The cop soon sort of came across Gaggi. They exchanged gunfire. Nino gets shot in the fucking neck. And ultimately, he gets found a short time later by another cop and arrested. He was charged with the Ippolito murders, attempted murder of the police, but would only be convicted of assault. He would end up being sentenced from 5 to 15 years. And he would head off to prison. While he's away in prison, Roy Demeo gets promoted to capo and takes over Gaggi's crew. And that's when the Demeo crew starts killing fucking everybody. I mean fucking everybody. That's also the same time period and when they killed the vacuum cleaner salesman because Chris Rosenberg had robbed, they said, 2 Cubans, and I know their names and we can discuss that at a later date because I don't want to totally get into the entire thing about it. But Chris Rosenberg ends up robbing a huge drug dealer who had some serious fucking ties. And the Colombians come back and say, well, we're going to kill the whole entire... We want Chris Rosenberg's head on a fucking platter or we're going to kill everybody in that family. And it was a scary time for Paul Castellano. He was very angry about what happened. It was a sloppy thing to do. And Castellano ordered, and Nino Gaggi ordered that Chris Rosenberg had to go. And for months... fucking Roy Demeo pushes it off to the point where what ends up happening is they're so fucking paranoid. A vacuum cleaner who looks Hispanic bangs on Demeo's door to try to sell fucking vacuum cleaners. They think he's a fucking narco. They fucking shoot at him. He takes off in the car and they go from fucking Staten Island heading into Brooklyn the whole fucking way. Demeo's fucking firing fucking bullets at him from his car. He ends up shooting him and killing him. Kid was fucking innocent. He did nothing wrong. And that brought a ton of heat to the Gambino crime family. Not John Gotti, but Roy Demeo. In 1981, Nino Gaggi, his sentence gets overturned on appeal and he would be released. It turns out that Nino Gaggi had bribed a juror and the juror made false claims of a government misconduct during the trial, which is why it gets overturned. As Gaggi entered back into the life, things were a lot different. Montiglio was sort of a junkie at this point, and he took off to California because the edict was if you did drugs, you'd get killed. So he takes off and goes to California out of fear. Demeo was killing everybody in sight, and the auto theft ring that had become so profitable had pretty much been dismantled. Then in 1980, Vito Arena, who was a former Demeo crew member, ends up becoming a rat. In 1982, Arena begins testifying about the crimes committed by Nino Gaggi and the Demeo crew. And as the investigation begins to deepen, Paul Castellano begins to fear that Demeo might cooperate. That's bullshit. That's what's widely been asserted by the FBI and by law enforcement, but that's not true. Paul Castellano wants Demeo dead because Demeo can put him in prison the rest of his life. Because Paul Castellano gave permission for Demeo to kill whoever he wanted. He gave Nino permission to do whatever he wanted. So the auto theft ring is now going to get Paul Castellano hooked up by the fucking balls. The fucking murders, which were 40 plus murders, were going to get Paul Castellano tied up in that mess. The fucking drugs from Demeo is going to get him put in prison the rest of his life. Then on the other side of this, you add Angelo Ruggiero getting busted for heroin and Gene Gotti and that whole mess. So what happens is, rather than take the shit out directly on the two people he should go after, now he wants to allegedly kill Gotti, which I'm sure he wanted to, but he would never have the balls to do that. But he should kill Nino Gaggi, because Gaggi should be responsible for what fucking Roy Demeo has done, because Demeo is underneath Gaggi. But Paul Castellano doesn't do that. What he does is he tells fucking Nino, kill Roy Demeo and anybody that gets in his way. Because Paul thought that if he could get Demeo out of the way, I don't got no more problems. Never mind the commission case that was coming. The two other indictments, one for 25 murders and one for the auto theft ring that Paul was going to get indicted for. He was looking for one single person. The problem was there were too many guys, and he didn't know that Montiglio was going to come around and rat. And so on January 10th of 1983, Demeo gets found in the trunk of his car. What had happened was Demeo had been told he needed to attend a meeting. Before Demeo leaves his house, he leaves his wallet, his keychain, everything he owns, and leaves it for his son Albert. He knew he was going to go. He knew he was just going to go. When he entered, he was supposed to meet at Nino at a Brooklyn garage. As he enters, Nino, Anthony Center, and Joey Testa shoot Roy to death. Anthony, and this is something you're never going to hear anywhere else, Anthony Center, who worked on cars his whole life and was a car thief from like the age of 11, installed a tape deck with a wire that ran from the tape deck inside the car, and it was made to look like Roy Demeo was an informant. There were two reasons why this happened. One, they wanted to throw the FBI off the case as to why he was killed, which was pretty stupid because, everybody was under indictment. But the other one was to give Paul Castellano plausible fucking excuse for why he killed Roy Demeo. Listen, he could say, you know what, this guy got me pinched with everything that he did. That wasn't good enough to kill a captain. Paul Castellano needed a clear-cut way. So if Paul says, look, I had to kill the guy because I was afraid he might testify, then they find a fucking cassette tape recorder in the trunk with a wire, what does that say? Well, it makes it look like Demeo was fucking ratting. And that's not the case. And people have reported that Roy Demeo was an informant. That's not true. And let me give you one reason why that's not true. If Roy Demeo was an informant, he would have given his loan sharking book, which was thousands of people. Thousands. We're talking like a ton of fucking money. He gave his loan sharking book to his son. He never would have done that. What Roy Demeo would have done if he was an informant, one, he wouldn't have gone to that meeting. Two, that book would have been handed over to the FBI. Three, once again, he never would have gone to that meeting. Roy Demeo was not an informant. Anybody that says that or tongues in cheeks that isn't telling you the truth. It was Anthony Center who installed the fucking recording device to give Paul Castellano credence. And it was designed to sort of throw off the FBI. They wanted it to look a certain way, but Roy Demeo never ratted on anybody. Ever. Soon after Demeo gets killed, Montiglio comes back to New York just to pick up an old loan shark in debt, and he ends up getting arrested. Once he gets arrested, he knows that he's going to be murdered, and he ends up talking and cooperating. Both Gaggi and Castellano both Castellano and Gaggi get indicted as a result. By 1984, most of the Gaggi-Demeo crew were locked up. Richard Denome gets killed by his own brother, Freddie Denome, on orders of Castellano. So Castellano orders one brother to kill another brother. So all Paul Castellano is trying to do at this point is like get rid of anybody that can testify against him. Problem was, Freddie Denome turns on Paul Castellano at that point and turns informant as well. By February, Gaggi is indicted for multiple counts of murder and racketeering. In March, Castellano officially gets indicted. The court would end up splitting the charges with the defendants, meaning that the first trial would be the car bullshit, the second trial would be the murders. The first trial began in October of 1985. Midway through the first trial, Paul Castellano would get whacked outside of Sparks Steakhouse. There's a lot of reasons for that that I've mentioned already. John Gotti may not have needed to do that, really, at the end of the day. Paul Castellano was going to go away for a long time. John Gotti had used the edict that, well, he might talk. He's looking at it a long time. This is what these guys say. I don't believe that to be the case. He felt that the Delacroix disrespect was too much. This is all heat that Castellano brought on himself because of the people that he put in places that he put. The one guy that isn't touched in any of this is Nino Gaggi, and he's the one that's directly responsible for half of it. He oversaw Demeo. That makes him culpable. But for some reason, Paul didn't see it that way. And Castellano gets killed. So that leaves Nino Gaggi the only defendant. In March of '86, Gaggi would be convicted of conspiracy to sell stolen cars and sentenced to 5 years. In '88, Gaggi would go on to trial number 2, which was for racketeering and 25 murders. And while at MCC during his second trial, Gaggi would have sort of like chest pains, and he complained to the CO there, I got chest pains, you got to be in the hospital. Basically, they said, yeah, whatever, and they just left him laying there in pain for like hours. Finally, they get him to the hospital, but he ends up dying later on that day. Nino Gaggi's wife would end up successfully suing the prison system for their failure to act due and diligently, and it would change sort of how it would change how the prison dealt with sick patients. And Nino Gaggi would be dead, and the rest would be history, as it stands. For the sake of this show, the one thing I do want to say before we go, I know I kind of blew through Gaggi a little bit, but his story is really not that big. But the mistakes that he made were paramount. Why Paul Castellano chose to sort of subjugate John Gotti is the problem really isn't the truth. The one thing that you never hear anybody mention is that Nino Gaggi created all of this havoc, killed all these fucking people. Roy Demeo crew was absolutely fucking out of their minds crazy. The Westies went and did whatever they did. These are all decisions that Paul Castellano made that affected the prosperity of the Gambino crime family. It's not as simple as Angelo Ruggiero won't give up them fucking tapes. I know I've said that before, but that's not the reason. There was First of all, he disrespected fucking Delacroix. All right? Then he's going to insert Bellotti after Delacroix dies. Bellotti didn't earn it. There's a million other guys ahead of Bellotti. Paul Castellano doesn't want to be a street guy. He wants to be a fucking politician and a business guy. Paul expects everybody to come up to his house and kiss his ass, and he then orders guys to kick up more money. This guy lives in a fucking multi-million-dollar house, makes millions of dollars a year, and it wasn't enough for him. He wanted more and more money. He asked for more money than any boss prior to him had ever asked of their men. So you have that. Then you have Nino Gaggi and Roy Demeo selling drugs, and lots of it. But yet Paul Castellano telling everybody else not to sell drugs. Then you have the Eppolitos, a captain who comes to his boss and does the right thing and says, listen, your rule is no drugs. This guy beat my kid out of a fucking drug deal. They're moving weight. It's going to create problems. Rather than Paul do the right thing there, he whacks him. He clips him. Didn't have, and I get it. These guys were telling on each other and whatever. But he doesn't do shit. He does nothing. He sits on it. He wavers past his own rule and just allows it. That's a big problem. When you are a boss and you stand for something, right? Everything he says, he goes against in a million different ways. For every way he says one needs to be, he's the opposite of that. How can you expect a guy like John Gotti, Sammy Gravano, Frankie Lucasio, and I could go fucking on and on and on and on about some of these guys. How could they respect him after all of that? Everything he supposedly stands for, he does the opposite of. He gets indicted, not because of John Gotti, not because of Angelo Ruggiero. He gets fucking indicted because of Roy Demeo, Dominic Montiglio, Freddie Denome, fucking Chris Rosenberg, Anthony Center, Joey fucking Testa, Vic Arena, Vito Arena. So there's like all of these people that Castellano was responsible for putting in positions. But yet the one guy who he should have been angry at, Nino Gaggi, gets a fucking pass. And I will never fucking understand that. And that's very strange to me. And so that's where Paul Castellano really made his fucking mistake. Because everybody was watching. Not only are your guys starving, they're not making no monies. But now you're going to act like this. You're going to bring all this heat onto the family. John Gotti did the right thing by the code of the street. He got rid of a guy that was bringing the FBI to them. Now, we can make an argument past that about John Gotti talking on wiretaps, and that's justifiable. I'm not arguing that. I've always said that. Loose lips sink ships. But the demise of the fucking Gambino crime family didn't fucking begin and end with John Gotti. It began prior to him with Castellano, with Demeo, with Montiglio, with Freddie Denome. It began before. Because if that wasn't the case, then after John Gotti takes over as boss, the Gambinos are making more money than they ever have. They've expanded into more rackets than they ever had. Things are running smooth. Then shit starts. And we can argue about the validity of a lot of things that happen after the fact. But the truth is, people try to make, and this isn't a John Gotti speech, but the truth is that John Gotti was good for the Gambino crime family. He was good for the mob in a sense. Should he have been public? No, but what was he supposed to do? We've talked about that before. But this idea that people single-handedly look at John Gotti and go, yep, that's the guy that brought down the American Mafia. No, it's not. How about the fucking assholes who got caught making people on videotape? Or Joey Massino. Joey Massino fucking decimated the fucking Bonanno crime family. But the worst, I think probably the worst, if you look at who did more damage to the American Mafia, the one who did the most damage besides Joe Velacci is Sammy Gravano. Because it wasn't just the Gambinos. I mean, we're talking everybody got buried under that bus. And so that's the story of Nino Gaggi. You know, gangster as it gets, wore it through and through, but not the brightest guy in the world. Why the fuck use a hand grenade to kill Vincent Governara? You're going to use a fucking hand grenade in downtown Brooklyn of all fucking places. Let's just shoot the fucking guy. You got to use a hand grenade? So the reality is that there are some truths, some myths, some folklore, and some truths, untruths, some myths, and folklore. And the thing that a lot of mob genre guys don't talk about is what was going on in the streets. You don't have to. You can think that John Gotti was out of line for killing Paul Castellano. Vinny the Chin did the same thing. Carlo Gambino did the same thing. Joe Bonanno did the same thing. Joe Masseria, ring any bells? So this is history, always repeats itself. What should have been good in 1920 was probably still relevant in 1980. You can fictionalize it and make it operatic, and by saying, oh, well, the commission all has to agree or this can't happen. Who says? Tell me one time the commission fucking stood by a rule. It was okay when Luciano did it. It was okay when Vinny the Chin did it on behalf of Vito Genovese, who wanted to take over the Luciano crime family. It was okay then. It was okay for Carlo Gambino to whack Frank Scalise and to whack fucking Albert Anastasia. So let's be realistic here. Let's be realistic about what we're talking about. That's the difference. This is the streets. The streets say he's got to go. And he's got to go for a multitude of reasons. It doesn't have to make sense to you on a moral level. This is the streets. This is what these guys do. The ends justify the means. They chased Joe Bonanno out of the life for a good reason. For a good reason. Joe Bonanno used his marriage from his son Bill to Rosalie Profaci to build his power base. And then what does he do? He suffocates Profaci out of business. Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino's family, Tommy Gambino marries Lucchese's daughter. They combine. All of a sudden, Idlewild, which is now JFK, opens up. They share business together. So there is some truth to like tradition and history and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's greed. It's greed. So that's going to be it for today. Feel free to message me at RealMobTalk7 on Twitter. Follow us at Facebook. Just type in Mob Talk Radio. Send your complaints, your grievances, and any notes or facts that you might feel are relevant. If you have any ideas of what to do with the new webpage, any suggestions, shoot them on over as well. We will be doing some Omerta clothing giveaways here next week, so stay tuned for that. Keep it tuned. Just do me a favor and just share the show. That's all I ask. Anyway, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the weather here in New York because it's beautiful. And we'll see you next week.